Good afternoon. I'm Mike Emanuel in Washington. History is about to be made in New York City. Former President Trump leaving Trump Tower. He's heading downtown to the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse, where he'll become the first former commander-in-chief to be arraigned on criminal charges. You can see the Trump motorcade, well, about to be making its way. There's a little action on the sidewalk there outside of Trump Tower. We expect it to be about a 15-minute drive to the courthouse. The NYPD is out in big numbers, clearing the path and making sure no protesters interfere with the legal process. This all started last week when Mr. Trump became the first former president to be indicted for a crime. Just yesterday, he had added another top criminal defense lawyer to his team, former Assistant U.S. Attorney Todd Blanche, as he gears up for what's expected to be a long legal fight. You can see the motorcade moving, leaving Trump Tower, heading downtown to the courthouse. To help with the massive security effort, we are not expecting any sort of public arrival or so-called perp walk today. The Secret Service and Manhattan District Attorney's Office have agreed there will be no handcuffs. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg charging the former president with allegedly covering up a hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels during his 2016 presidential campaign. Bragg says the money was a payoff so Daniels would not discuss an affair she had with Mr. Trump before he decided to run for office. And he's now pursuing an untested legal theory to elevate the charge from a misdemeanor to a felony because he claims the payments amounted to unreported campaign donations. There's an aerial view of Manhattan on a beautiful spring day as you see the motorcade making its way from Trump Tower down to the courthouse. Until now, this indictment has been under seal, so we should learn a great deal this afternoon about precise charges and Bragg's approach today. The Trump campaign is claiming the indictment is a witch hunt, calling it a case of selective prosecution at best and political retribution at worst. It's also worth noting the Trump campaign has raised a great deal of money, millions of dollars, since the announcement of this indictment. Fox News correspondent Madeline Rivera is outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Madeline, what's happening there?
Good afternoon, Mike. Well, police have set up metal barricades blocking car traffic from passing through to Center Street past the courthouse where Mr. Trump will be arraigned later on this morning. Police have also blocked off pedestrian traffic from passing through. But as you can see behind me, the group of onlookers over here in Lower Manhattan is growing bigger by the minute. You have got anti-Trump protesters and Trump supporters gathered here as well. I don't know if you can hear some of the protest over here. It seems that many of the anti-Trump protesters are located across the street. You see them there carrying signs with messages that say, TikTok, time's up, justice matters. Some of them chanting, lock him up. Regardless, though, it seems that yes, the mood here is pretty lively. However, it does appear calm as of right now. We haven't seen any physical altercations. The other thing I do want to point out right now, Mike, is that besides the group of onlookers over here, you've also got a whole group of media reporters looking to cover this historic story. I'm just going to ask my photographer, Phil, to pan over to our left over here, and you can see, or rather to my right, and you can see this is just a fraction of the cameras and the journalists that are looking to capture this story just a block away from us on this intersection of Hogan Place and Center Street. You've got even more reporters who want to grab some visuals of the former president heading into the courthouse again for this historic arraignment. This is a story that has grabbed international headlines, not just national headlines. All of us waiting to see how this will all unfold later on today. Mike.
Madeline, it's worth noting that Congress is out for the Easter Passover break. Have you spotted any lawmakers, either supporters or people who oppose President Trump up there in Manhattan?
We do know that Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene led a protest earlier this morning at a park located across the street from the courthouse. Many people were there, probably the largest group of demonstrations, largest demonstration that we have seen so far over the last few weeks that we have been covering this story. Again, it was peaceful, although we did hear from one of the producers who was monitoring that rally that there was a physical altercation between two people. But for the most part, Mike, it was peaceful. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene was not the only member of Congress to be here today. We also know that Congressman George Santos came here to show support for the former president. Mike?
And security seems very tight. Does it feel like a very secure situation outside the courthouse at this hour, Maddie?
It does, and the NYPD has been preparing for this type of scenario for weeks. The NYPD has issued a stand-ready order for all its officers ready to be deployed if necessary. However, New York City Mayor says they've been monitoring all scenarios, and they say that there was no credible threat to the city. Mayor Adams also stressing that, yes, he does encourage protests, but he does want them to be peaceful protests. Mike.
Thank you, Madeline. Back in the Manhattan Criminal Court building, final preparations are underway. Judge Juan Manuel Merchan not allowing cameras inside the courtroom. But we've been building to this moment since President Trump tweeted that he expected to be charged and arrested. Now over to Fox News Channel for more on this developing story.
Under Alvin Bragg to misdemeanors. And, just the irony in that, Jillian, as we watch this. And, a lot of people say, he's really had to kind of contort the law into interesting ways in order to make this appear a misdemeanor that is now a felony. And whether or not there are 34 felonies that we're going to hear about, which was reported by another outlet early today. So, politically, I think that we've got a lot of chapters to go in this thing when you look at 2024. You've got a the Mar-a-Lago case, the classified documents case, is one that people think has more meat on the bones in terms of obstruction charges that could be coming down the pipeline. But this is a man who has been, in the thick of it and had people push back on him, and he pushes back hard on them as well in many cases all throughout the course of his entire career. So it's not, even though it's unprecedented, Jillian, it is not an unusual posture for Donald Trump to be in aggressive mode.
We saw some pictures of the motorcade as it's making its way down there to 100 Center Street, currently on the FDR.
And on the other hand, the prospect seems to be clear now that we'll have Donald Trump again, a man who today stands indicted and arraigned in a court in New York City on charges that many legal experts think are flimsy and should be thrown out. It is not a moment that I think most people will find inspiring.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And the list that you just gave us of all of the concerns going on in the world, I think about it in terms of here in Manhattan as well, Britt. When you look at an increase in serious crime of 22%, and we have a district attorney who has focused a lot of his attention on moving things from felony to misdemeanor. And in this case, he's going from misdemeanor to felony. He's made it quite clear that he wanted to get this former president, Britt. How do you think that all sits with the American people as they watch this?
Well, I must say I was struck by I guess it was a CNN poll in the last couple of days, in which a distinct minority, 37%, thought there was that a crime was involved here, but 60% were in support of the indictment, which means that an awful lot of people who don't think he did anything were happy to see him pursued anyway. That's a little disturbing, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would. I would. And we've seen those numbers. And when you have a majority of people who say they think that the motivation is political, but they'd like to see the person indicted anyway, I think it puts a fine point, Britt, on what we've seen happen in this country, just very intense division across this country over the last 6 years or so. And, I just wonder if it's responsible to take this action that we're seeing happen in New York. And we know we're going to go down this road several more times in Georgia and in this special counsel's investigation as well.
Yeah, and you have to wonder whether not just this case, but any of the cases being contemplated really rise to the level that would mean that they're necessary to bring. In light of the fact that he is a former president with an ardent following of some significant segment of the Republican base, and the feeling of alienation and disgust and distaste that those people will feel. Now, look, these people working on a case like this exist, like the Attorney General of the United States exists, at the intersection of law and politics. And you're supposed to keep the two separate, but they, in some cases, are inextricably intertwined. And that is the case here with Donald Trump. So what we would hope for in a situation like this is kind of the utmost in prosecutorial discretion. In other words, I could bring a case, but maybe it would be wiser not to. One wonders about the wisdom of this case, and certainly one wonders even also about the wisdom of some of these other cases that may be brought.
Yeah, it's a great point, and my mind goes back to James Comey standing in front of the cameras with a long list of, I think he used the word reckless behavior on the part of Hillary Clinton back then, and then said, but no prosecutor would bring these charges. And I think, you know, it does feel like there are not, you know, we've talked a lot about adults in the room and looking at the big picture of the country and what's best for the country overall. It feels like that's a layer that we don't really operate in a whole lot anymore, Britt.
No, I agree with that, and I think this would be a moment where statesmanship would be called for. It seems, alas, to be somewhat in short supply.
Indeed, it does. Do we have the soundbite, you guys, from that press conference? Or we're not going to cut away to that because we may be watching him walk out. We'll get to that later. Britt, thank you. Stand by for us if you would. I want to bring in Bill Barr, the former Attorney General, twice Attorney General in the Bush administration and the Trump administration. As we watch this play out, I know you've been watching it closely this afternoon as well. Bill, your thoughts. Welcome. Good to have you here. And your thoughts on this.
Well, my thoughts are pretty much the same as they've been for the last week or so. I haven't heard anything that suggests there's something new in this indictment that wasn't anticipated. If there is, then we'll have to respond to that when we see it. But I think what Brett said is absolutely right. Prosecution should always involve a measure of discretionary judgment where you weigh the public interest as a whole. And even before I became Attorney General the second time, I said in relation to Mueller's investigation that before we go off on a president, a sitting president, or a former president, there should be clear evidence of a real crime. It shouldn't be a debatable crime. The evidence should be strong. And also, this is not just by virtue of his prior office, but he's a candidate in the current election. So this is a charging decision that affects our current national politics. And judgment there, it seems to me, and prosecutorial discretion should commend caution in this circumstance. And as I've said, this appears to be just a pathetically weak case that is, I think, demonstrably wrong on the law, which explains why the Department of Justice, even after I left office, has never pursued this idea of campaign finance problem.
It was passed on by the Southern District of New York, passed on by the Federal Election Commission, this case. So, you know, you talk about prosecutorial discretion. It looks like the next level, the next opportunity for that discretion is going to fall on this judge, Marchand. When he looks at whether or not to dismiss this case, if he feels that it is, in your words, pathetically weak. What goes into that part of this process, Bill?
Well, I think it'll be largely a legal judgment as to whether there's really probable cause to believe that this falsification of records was done to defraud anybody. And second, whether or not this involves the campaign finance law, which I don't think it does. And I think any idea that this defrauds the voters, as Andy just said a moment ago, is simply wrong. You know, that doesn't create a crime.
But so if that's the case, and you're Judge Marchand, who has successfully prosecuted another financial case in with the Trump organization, and you look at this, you know, how do you weigh that? Do you expect that because he's in this courtroom, he's just going to say, you know, no, we're not going to dismiss this charge. It's been brought by D.A. Bragg?
No, I mean, I hope he exercises his role as a judge and serves as a screening mechanism for this kind of overreach by a prosecutor. I'm not optimistic he will, but we'll see.
So the other issues that we expect to be brought up here are change of venue. Jonathan Turley said, although that is usually something that is not taken, not acted upon. He said there might be an argument for that here. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought that was one of the stronger arguments. I agree with Jonathan on that. But again, I'm not holding my breath that there's going to be any change in that.
We also have talked about the larger scope of some of these other processes that are underway. And the one that you have said looks the most problematic for the former president is the Mar-a-Lago classified document case that's under Jack Smith, the special counsel right now. Talk to us a little bit about your thinking on that one.
Well, I think the issue there isn't the taking of the documents. I think the issue there is what happened after the department asked for them back, which they are government property, and also then subpoenaed them. And from the government's actions, I believe that they probably have evidence of efforts to mislead the government, and they're trying to determine whether Trump was behind that and was involved in obstructing their efforts to obtain the documents. And that would be viewed as a fairly serious problem. But again, discretion would come into play there as well. And I think Trump did not hurt himself initially by his bombastic statements about and his truculence about the documents and making some what were perceived as threats about public uproar if the government was to pursue him. But on the other hand, since that, you've had Biden and Pence involved with document problems. So that would cut in favor of exercising discretion, because otherwise you would have the appearance of two systems of justice and two different standards.
But it sounds like you're suggesting that the difference is the issue of obstruction, not of having documents in your possession.
Right.
So if there was manipulation in the form of this letter that went back to the archives saying everything, we gave you everything, you've got it all. And then if they can track something that came post that shows that there were things that were moved and clearly that they understood they had possession of, that's the issue here. That's the obstruction, that at least as far as we can tell, right?
That's right. And the argument for pursuing it within the Department of Justice would be the argument, look, how can we protect all our national secrets and require that our employees and people involved in sensitive programs protect the information if we turn a blind eye to something like this? So I'm sure there's going to be some pressure to pursue that case if they have strong evidence.
So one of the things that has come up here is whether or not this judge would put a gag order in place. And we thought that the president might speak on his way into the courtroom. They were running late. He looked quite serious, as you would expect in this situation as he walked in. Do you think he will take advantage, as we've been told, of the opportunity to say something on the way out, and would you advise it?
Yeah, I think he'll take the opportunity, and I think it's fine if he does. I mean, I think it's important for him to get his message out, and I think it would be very bad to impose a gag order on him, especially in the circumstances of this case where he's a candidate in an election.
Yeah. Britt, I want to bring you back in here. Let's take a look at this exchange, Britt, and we'll cut right away from this if the former president walks out. But this is the exchange that happened in the briefing room a short time ago with New York Times reporter Michael Scher and Karine Jean-Pierre. Watch this for us.
We're just going to be very mindful. These are ongoing cases.
100 cases involving Americans whose freedom was at risk.
I hear you. Right? This is something that all of Americans watch in real time. In real time. And people died. People died.
I don't need a lecture on the fact that people died.
But you're lecturing me. But you're lecturing me.
I'm asking questions. You called January 6th historic. It was absolutely historic. None of us had ever seen that before. Nobody's seen this before either.
So this started, I should have set it up better, Britt, but it started with a question about what their reaction was to what's happening today in the courthouse in New York. And he's making the suggestion that, you talked about January 6th and those cases all the time. Why can you not talk about this, Britt?
Well, the sad truth is that she's not the greatest spokesperson that ever lived. And she seemed unprepared for the question. I mean, I think the general policy in the White House is, as you heard President Trump say in the driveway the other day when asked a question about, whether the case against Trump was politically motivated, he said, I have no comment on Trump. that seems to be the order of the day, and that's what his spokesperson there, the White House press secretary, was following that course. But the point is entirely correct. When it suits them politically, they'll say whatever they want to say. And, you know, this isn't the first time we've ever seen this out of a White House, but that's what's going on.
Yeah, and politically, Britt, it would seem that they are quite happy to sort of sit back and let all of this play out as the president deliberates over whether or not he's going to run again. He's probably quite happy to have the focus on this.
Yeah, and it works kind of on two levels, Martha. On the one level, the people who really dislike Donald Trump, no matter what doubts they might have or should have about the legitimacy of this indictment, the people who really hate Trump love to see the idea of him, you know, in the dock, the humiliation of being booked and fingerprinted and arraigned and all that, even as embarrassing as that undoubtedly is for him, they love it. And they don't really seem to care whether it's a legitimate case or not. On the other hand, to the extent that it revs up his supporters and strengthens his support, at least for the moment, as the polls are suggesting, that betters his chance of the Republican nomination. And they like that, too, because they think that if Joe Biden runs, or even if he doesn't, that Donald Trump can't win again. And there's a pretty good case to be made that that may be true. And so there you go, Martha. Political calculus seems fairly simple.
Yeah. Interesting. You know, we're getting some messages from people in the Trump circle. Eric Trump saying this just happened. The Ninth Circuit just awarded Trump $121,000 in attorney fees from Stormy Daniels. Order just released. This is an addition, he says, to the $500,000 that she already owes him. Obviously, interesting timing on that one, Brett.
Yeah, well, it's not exactly it's not the stuff of a political slogan. Vote for me. I collected $121,000 from a porn star I had an encounter with. Oh, good.
Bill, your thoughts on that judgment?
I mean, that was expected. I mean, he's entitled to those fees. The timing, I have to say, is very curious.
And it does raise this issue of, you know, sort of the underlying issues that we're talking about here, you know.
But I'm afraid, you know, this is just the beginning of 2 years where, you know, we're going to have a lot of heavy breathing about a lot of legal developments. And it's unfortunate because it'll divert attention from the serious issues that the country faces and we have to wrestle with in this election.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, Brett. And, you know, if you're Ron DeSantis right now, or Nikki Haley, or anyone else who's thinking about getting into this race, how do you manage this part of the equation as a candidate?
Well, I think you'll wait for it to pass, really. I mean, look, this event has happened. The arraignment has occurred. There will be motions and news made in the course of the proceedings that lead up to a trial, if indeed there is one. But during the rest of the time, things will return somewhat to normal. And once this day and this circus outside the Trump Tower and outside the courthouse passes, we'll be back to a normal circumstance for normal campaigning. Now, the key fact here is that at some point, one of these candidates or someone acting on their behalf is going to have to take the former president on, and to do so effectively. You know, you've seen it done. I mean, Chris Christie did a good job on Marco Rubio a few years ago, which ended up benefiting.
My thanks to former Attorney General Bill Barr and Andy McCarthy and everybody here. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, we are waiting to hear from Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor, of course, who brought this 34-count indictment against the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, moments ago, pleading not guilty to those 34 charges, largely focused on falsifying business records. All of this going down a few minutes ago at the Manhattan Criminal Court. The president is returning right now to LaGuardia Airport. He will fly back to Florida at his Mar-a-Lago compound in Palm Beach. We understand that he is still going to make comments on this later this evening. We don't know in what form, whether he'll answer questions, make a speech, a combination therein. He is going to speak. The judge did not issue a gag order here on any of this, but had advised him to watch his social media use ahead of hearing from Alvin Bragg, and that could happen any minute. I do want to go to Brian Yennis right now with what went down in there. And again, courtesy Jake Gibson as well, who was in that courtroom to find out exactly what transpired. Brian.
Neil, yeah, we'll begin right now just on the indictment. What we now know before DA Alvin Bragg speaks is that these are 34 felony counts for falsifying business records in New York. And in the indictment, the first line reads, the defendant...
But important to do so. But David, looking at these charges, there is a lot of redundancy here, and there's not a lot of whole new here. What are you getting a sense of?
Well, first of all, no problem, because Alvin Bragg is a huge newsmaker today. But, Neil, what's curious is that, this specific
So that was Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg laying out the case against former President Donald Trump after history was made in a Manhattan courtroom. The former president of the United States entering a not guilty plea to 34 felony counts. We have not heard from Mr. Trump yet. We do expect that later in the evening. For the latest on this story, stay with this Fox station in Washington. I'm Mike Emanuel.
This has been a Fox News special report.
The other thing that's interesting that you mentioned is, sure, we know about the statements, or the payments rather, to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Also a third payment to a former Trump doorman to keep something quiet. It's what Bragg's office calls catch and kill. But as you say, these are not 34 separate felonies dealing with all different subjects. In the actual indictment on some of the counts later on, and I read through it, it specifically mentions, Neil, and it's written out that it's not a check, it's just written down in the general ledger. So every time something was written down in the ledger or written down, that was considered to be a felony. So sometimes that's called stacking at the Department of Justice. Of course, that's a separate entity because that's a federal agency. But still, as Andy McCarthy, our famed Andy McCarthy, said on the air several days ago, he was worried about the quantity overtaking the quality here, because you have multiple different charges just overtaking what he would call the quality here, Neil.
So let me understand, too, just the pace of events. By August, the defense then has an opportunity to present its motions in a file, right? The next month
Correct.
After that, prosecution has a response, can respond to that. And then a hearing that isn't until December this year. And that will likely be pushed back as well, right?
Well, a hearing in December of this year. They talked about a trial next January, as you heard Jake Gibson, who I work with at DOJ. Right. He was in the courtroom. And the judge apparently, or Justice Merchan, as he's called in this case, said that he wants to move expeditiously or judiciously or quickly in layman's terms. That does not seem too quickly when you think the next time there's going to be an appearance or a hearing on this would be in December. Of course, yes, if lawyers will file motions and things get dragged out legally, but that seems like that's an awful long time away when we're talking the holiday season in December at the end of this year.
Yeah, wild stuff. David, thank you very much for that. David Spahn.
You're welcome.
Meanwhile, we've been showing you the president has already left New York, leaving the courthouse and proceeding right to LaGuardia International Airport. He's going back to Palm Beach International Airport, of course. That's where he'll park his plane, and it's very close to Mar-a-Lago, from where he hopes to address the nation tonight, or at least report his questions. I'm not aware of how this is going to transpire and what he's going to say or do. Ashley Webster, following all of those developments. Ashley, what do we know about the president's plans tonight? What he's going to say, exactly where he's going to say it? Will it be a Q&A format? Will it be a speech? What?
Given Donald Trump's past history, Neil, I would imagine it's going to be a long speech based on what happened today. We know, based on that glare that he gave cameras going into that courtroom and the picture we saw of him in the courtroom, he is most definitely fired up. We also know that the judge did not impose a gag order, but did say, watch the tone of your social posts. As you know, that the former president earlier today started talking about an unfair venue in Manhattan. He talked about a highly partisan judge. He called it a kangaroo court. He suggested that Alvin Bragg himself should indict himself for leaks from his office. I think we're going to get much of the same rhetoric tonight. I don't think he's going to do a Q&A. I think this is a speech in front of what we understand are hundreds and hundreds of Trump supporters and campaigners. And again, I think he is going to be very fired up. We should mention his campaign has already raised more than $8 million since the indictment was first announced last Thursday afternoon. And so he continues to rally the base. He's also creating, I think, a rally around the flag moment, at least for him. The polls have him at least 30 points ahead in the GOP primary against the nearest competitor, Ron DeSantis, who isn't even in the race right now. But will this be of long-term benefit to Donald Trump? Well, time will tell. But certainly tonight, he is going to be a rabble-rouser. He's going to fire up the crowd. And I think we're going to hear a lot about political persecution, political witch hunt, and a political hit job. Just to name a few of the banners I think we're going to hear tonight, Neil.
All right. Actually, there are no indications from anyone you've talked to that even though the judge didn't issue a gag order, he was saying something akin to just be careful on social media. I don't want to misstate what he said, but he did extend that to remarks. The president. You've talked to that even though the judge didn't issue a gag order, he was saying something akin to just be careful on social media. I don't want to misstate what he said, but he did extend that to remarks. The president.